Hello everyone, welcome to Legacy As Academy. This is the first video in the series of 4 videos where we will be discussing about Biosphere Reserves in India. Let's discuss what do you mean by Biosphere Reserves, why are they constituted, and what do you mean by MAB. You will be hearing this in news, Man and Biosphere Reserve concept, and how many Biosphere Reserves are there in India and what is their distribution. Let's begin. What are Biosphere Reserves? Biosphere Reserves are special environmental zones for both people and nature. This is very important when it comes to national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. This is how Biosphere Reserve is different. It is designated both for people and also nature, and are living examples of how human beings and nature can coexist while respecting each other's needs. This is a very good example for something called as cohabitation. Okay, this is something that you have to remember, a key word, that is cohabitation. Some biosphere reserves are recognized by UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, and these biosphere reserves, which are recognized by UNESCO under Man and Biosphere Program, in India, there are 18 biosphere reserves, very important to remember, out of which 12 biosphere reserves are recognized by UNESCO, which means 12 MAB, Man and Biosphere Reserves, are there in India. What are the examples of biosphere reserves? Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, which stretches along the states of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka and Kerala. Okay, Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. Great Nicobar Biosphere Reserve in Andaman and Nicobar. Gulf of Mannar Biosphere Reserve in between India and Sri Lanka. See, Biosphere Reserve in a nutshell, it is an area where humans and wildlife, or nature for that matter, can coexist. Like a forest area where the human habitation is present and also which works for the conservation of nature and biodiversity. Criteria to designate as Biosphere Reserve. What are the criteria which will be considered in order to designate a forest area or an area for that matter or an ecosystem for that matter as a Biosphere Reserve? First one, a site or any area should have an effectively protected and minimally disturbed core area of value of nature conservation. In the sense, any area for that matter should have effectively protected, it should have some primitive species, it should have some special species, and also it should be minimally disturbed. It should have minimal disturbance by urbanization or minimum anthropogenic interference. Second one, the core area should sustain viable population representing all trophic levels in the ecosystem, which means the core area or the central area of a biosphere reserve. Okay, if you imagine this as a biosphere reserve, the central area that is called as core area should sustain, or which should have, sustain in the sense which should have viable population, viable in the sense optimum population or some great population representing all trophic levels. It should not be limited. It should not be limited to any particular ecosystem or a food chain or a food web. It should represent all trophic levels. Third one, the management should involve local communities to bring variety of knowledge and conservation. Okay, it should bring variety of knowledge and conservation mechanisms in order to protect Biosphere Reserve. Biosphere Reserve is both for the protection of humans and nature and biodiversity. That is the reason why the management of the Biosphere Reserve should effectively involve the local communities, because they will have some indigenous knowledge, and this knowledge can be used in order to protect the Biosphere Reserve and its components. What is the zonation pattern of Biosphere Reserve? It's a very important concept when it comes to prelims examination point of view. In the environment, zonation of Biosphere Reserve. Biosphere Reserve is divided into 3 zones. You can see here core area, buffer area and transition area. See, this is the core area. We have seen something called as core area when we were discussing the how to designate Biosphere Reserve. This is a core area. This is the outer area from the core area is buffer zone. After buffer zone, you have something called as transition area. Three related zones: core area, buffer area, and outer transition area. What is the importance? Core area, for that matter, as the name itself suggests, it is exclusively for wildlife or biodiversity, which means there is no human habitation, or no human interference is possible in core area. For that matter, you can take the example of any national park. Okay, famous one, Bannerghatta National Park. You do not have any kind of human existence. You can just go visit few places, look at animals and come back. But there is no human habitation, there is no hunting, there is no cutting of wood. Okay, nothing is possible in core area. Buffer area. Buffer area is a place where human habitation or a human interference is minimum. Okay, human interference is minimum. For example, if any tribe, for that matter, wants to cut wood or have their livelihood, they are permitted. They can do it. In transition area, the last area, that is transition area, it is reserved for research purpose and human interference is permitted. Okay, these are the zonations. These are the zonations when it comes to Biosphere Reserve. You should be aware of core, buffer and transition zone. Okay, this is the structure of Biosphere Reserve. I hope you have followed. Let's look at the functions of Biosphere Reserve. What are the functions of Biosphere Reserve? There are three functions: conservation, development and logistic support. Under conservation, what should be conserved? Genetic resources, endemic species and the ecosystem. Endemic species are those species that are at the verge of extinction, which are very less in number, who are at the verge of extinction. These species should be protected in Biosphere Reserve. Second one, in order to prevent man-animal conflict. What is man-animal conflict? You have heard of man-eating tigers, man-eating or man-eater, man-eating tigers. Whenever tiger, leopard or a lion comes in contact with the human habitat or villages, for that matter, or any highway roads, for that matter, you will have, that is called as man-animal conflict. You have heard of elephants that destroy agricultural crops and the farmers are under losses. That is an example of man-animal conflict. Biosphere Reserve, by providing a large area for wildlife habitation, they would prevent man-animal conflict. Second one, development. Development of what? Promoting the human growth. You have seen Biosphere Reserve is reserved for both humans, biodiversity and nature. So promoting human growth that is sustainable on socio-cultural and ecological level. So the development, that is sustainable development of human, is also a function of Biosphere Reserve. Third one is the logistic support. Promoting research activities and education, or the environmental education, is also the function of Biosphere Reserve. Let's look at the Biosphere Reserves of India. What is important from the examination point of view here is the location, which means the state in which a particular Biosphere Reserve is located or it is stretched. Let's come from the South India. Great Nicobar Biosphere Reserve, Agastya Malai Biosphere Reserve in between Kerala and Tamil Nadu, Gulf of Mannar Biosphere Reserve, Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve stretches between Karnataka, Kerala and Tamil Nadu, Sheshachalam Biosphere Reserve in the state of Andhra Pradesh, Central India, Kutch, Pachmarhi, Panna and Achnakmar. Okay, these are the three Biosphere Reserves in the state of MP. Okay, Madhya Pradesh, you should know it. Shimli Pal Biosphere Reserve, very important, in the state of Odisha. Sundarbans where we have Sundari trees, or also mangroves. Okay, mangroves, Sundarban Biosphere Reserve. No Creek Biosphere Reserve, Meghalaya. Manas Biosphere Reserve, Dihang Dibang Biosphere Reserve in the state of Arunachal Pradesh, Manas in the state of Assam, Dibru Saikhowa Biosphere Reserve in the state of Assam, Kanchenjunga in the state of Sikkim. Okay, in North India we have Cold Desert Biosphere Reserve and Nanda Devi in the state of Uttarakhand, Cold Desert in Himachal Pradesh. Okay, these are the 18 biosphere reserves and their locations that you should be aware of. Let's look at what do you mean by Man and Biosphere Reserve concept, that is by UNESCO. All over the world there are 727 sites, that is 727 biosphere reserves that are recognized by UNESCO and are called as Man and Biosphere Reserve concept. And these 727 biosphere reserves are in 131 countries and there are 22 transboundary sites. You don't have to remember these numbers for your exam, but you should know that there are 727 Man and Biosphere reserves. Why is it? Why do we have something called as Man and Biosphere Reserve? It is an intergovernmental scientific program that aims to establish scientific basis for enhancing the relationship between people and their environment. It just aims to enhance the relationship between man and the environment. This is the reason why, this is the objective of Man and Biosphere Reserve concept. 12 out of the 18 biosphere reserves in the country have become a part of MAB, that is Man and Biosphere Reserve concept. We have seen 18 biosphere reserves and their locations based on state. Now we will see what are these 12 biosphere reserves that are recognized by UNESCO under Man and Biosphere Reserve program. First one, Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve in the year 2000. I am reminding you again, you do not have to remember the years. Okay, years in which they were constituted. If you have a recent one, 2022, some biosphere reserves that is becoming a part of MAB, then you have to remember the recent one. You don't have to remember the dates. All you have to know is how many biosphere reserves, that is 12, and what are they and their location as usual. These are the three things that you have to know with respect to MAB. Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, Tamil Nadu. Gulf of Mannar, Tamil Nadu. Sundarbans, West Bengal. Nanda Devi Biosphere Reserve, Uttarakhand. Pachmarhi, Madhya Pradesh. No Creek, Meghalaya. Shimli-Pal, Odisha. Achnakmar, Chhattisgarh. Great Nicobar, Great Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Agastya Malai, Kerala and Tamil Nadu. This is a trans boundary which is in between two states. Kanchenjunga Biosphere Reserve in the state of Sikkim. Panna Biosphere Reserve in Madhya Pradesh. These are the 12 biosphere reserves that are considered under MAB. So what to study? We have seen 18 biosphere reserves and also we have seen 12 MAB. What should be studied? I am just giving you an example. In future videos, okay, second and the third part of this particular series, I will be covering various biosphere reserves from South India, Central India, Northeast and North India. And what will I be covering is flora and fauna, vegetation, location and climate. Okay, before 2018, if you just knew the state in which the Biosphere Reserve is located, that would be more than enough. But 2019 there was a question on climate. 2020 also there was a question on the climate of Biosphere Reserve. So I will also be discussing the climate. Okay, so what you should study? For example, take for example Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. This is the map of Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. You have Karnataka here, you will have Kerala here, and you also have Tamil Nadu. Okay, it stretches between these three states. Inside Biosphere Reserve of Nilgiri, you have many national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. For example, Brahmagiri Wildlife Sanctuary, Nagarhole Tiger Reserve, Bandipura Tiger Reserve, Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary, Madhumalai Tiger Reserve, Mukurti Silent Valley National Park, BRT Wildlife Sanctuary, that is Biligiri Rangana Tittu, Biligiri Rangana Betta Wildlife Sanctuary, Satyamangala Wildlife Sanctuary. These are the wildlife sanctuaries and the national parks that are a part of Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. So, whenever you get a news or a current affairs question or a current affairs for that matter with respect to any of these national parks or wildlife sanctuaries, you have to go through all of this. The flora and fauna, what is the vegetation of this particular biosphere reserve and wildlife sanctuary or national park, location and the climate. Okay, this is how you study, you integrate your static knowledge with current affairs and predict prelims question. This is what we do at Legacy IAS Academy. Okay, we predict our current affairs question, we predict the current affairs question based on the static knowledge. Okay, what is the static knowledge that we have and how can UPSC ask the question? I hope you have liked the video. For more enriching content, please subscribe to Legacy IAS Academy. This is the first video of the series. In the second and the third video, we will also be discussing in detail about the various biosphere reserves. Thanks a lot. Have a nice day.